The clatter of silverware and the low murmur of distant conversations faded as the heavy hum of the espresso machine filled the space around me. I wiped my hands on the apron tied too tightly around my waist, the fabric soaked through with the weariness of my third double shift this week. No matter how much concealer I used, the dark circles under my eyes were permanent, reminders that the hours at Le Bellissimo never ended. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. The place smelled of garlic, butter, and the scent of customers who thought a tip was a form of charity rather than a standard. Every night was the same, plates in hand, serving smiles, all the while feeling like I was invisible unless someone needed their glass refilled. "Anita, order up," Marco shouted, slamming the bell as if it were a declaration of war. I didn't flinch. This was my life now. Moving like clockwork, I carried the plates with practiced ease to the table, then went back for more. Each task was familiar, ingrained in me after years of working in this upscale restaurant. I'd mastered it all. The balancing of plates, the forced smile, the quiet, invisible servitude. No one cared about the waitress behind the scenes, the one who made sure everything was perfect while they enjoyed their night out. I wasn't complaining. I needed the money. My younger brother, Matteo, was struggling in school, and I was doing my best to keep us afloat. I've been working here for a while, and though I had a routine, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was stuck. Stuck in a life I didn't want. Stuck with the same tired days that blurred into one another. That's when I saw him. He didn't just enter the restaurant. He commanded it. Tall, his broad shoulders cutting a commanding silhouette through the room. Ricardo Ferri made a quiet entrance, his presence impossible to ignore. The hum of conversation seemed to subside as all eyes subtly turned his way. He was the kind of man who didn't need to announce his wealth because his mere presence did it for him. His suit wasn't just tailored. It was crafted as if it had been made specifically for him, with precision and care. The fabric stretched over his wide chest and trim waist, a dark silhouette that exuded power, money, and confidence. But it wasn't just the suit. It was the stillness about him, the calm that hung in the air like smoke before a storm. He wasn't in a hurry, didn't rush to make his presence known. His eyes, dark and focused, scanned the room, taking in everything in a way that made the room seem to shrink around him. I didn't know him. I hadn't seen him here before. Yet somehow, as I looked at him, a strange feeling crawled up my spine. Maybe it was the way his eyes locked with mine when he noticed me, his gaze intense but unreadable, like he was assessing more than just the waitress standing before him. His hands moved with purpose, steady and deliberate. A simple gold signet ring caught the light when he turned the page of a leather-bound notebook, the only clue to his status that was so clearly visible. Even the air seemed to bend around him, pressing everything else into the background, making him the focal point of everything in the room. "Been waiting 15 minutes, Diane said, pulling me from my thoughts with a harsh hiss. She was the senior waitress, always reminding me of my place, never shy about making it clear how expendable I was. I plastered on a smile, the kind that had become second nature over the years, and walked over to Ricardo's table. My heart inexplicably quickened, and the usual rush of exhaustion and apathy faded as I closed the distance. As I drew closer, I caught his scent, something woodsy, expensive, and nothing like the cheap colognes the other customers wore. It was the scent of someone who didn't need to advertise his worth, someone who owned the space he walked in. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Le Bellissimo. Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, though my pulse was still hammering in my ears. I hope I didn't sound as nervous as I felt. He looked up from the notebook, his amber-flecked eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch between us. His expression wasn't warm, not by any means. It was sharp, assessing, a predator's gaze, watchful and calculating. He didn't speak immediately, as if savoring the silence before responding. And then, just as I thought I would break the silence again, the door to the restaurant swung open with force. Everything shifted. The air thickened. The sudden sound of chairs scraping against the floor punctuated the tension in the room. Before I could make sense of it, I heard the unmistakable sound of gunshots. Chaos erupted. Customers screamed, ducked, and ran for cover. Glasses shattered as people scrambled to get out of the line of fire. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was Ricardo. Without thinking, my instincts kicked in, and I moved toward him, my body acting on need to protect him, even though I didn't know him. I didn't even know who was shooting or why. The next thing I knew, I felt a sharp pain, a searing heat in my side, and my legs gave way beneath me. The bullet meant for Ricardo had struck me instead. Blood soaked my white blouse, staining a deep red. I collapsed on the floor, the world around me spinning into a blur of voices and chaos. The last thing I heard was Ricardo's voice, cold and commanding. Get her to safety. My body felt heavy, my thoughts fading as the world around me darkened. Everything I knew about myself, my world, vanished in an instant. And all I was left with was Ricardo Ferry, the man I had just risked my life for, who was far more than I had ever imagined. The world seemed to spin in slow motion. I could hear the shouts and screams of the other customers, but they felt distant, muffled as if I were underwater. The pain in my side surged like wildfire, my legs buckling beneath me as the warm blood soaked through my blouse, a stark contrast against the crisp white fabric. The once serene atmosphere of the restaurant had turned into complete chaos, a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. I had only moved to protect him. Ricardo's presence was still there, looming above me like a force I couldn't escape. My vision was growing blurry, the edges of the room fading as everything around me became more distant, more unreal. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, just the cold marble floor against my cheek. And then his voice, cold, commanding, broke through the haze. "Stay with me," Ricardo said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I tried to focus, to stay conscious, but the pull of darkness was strong. My body trembled with the effort of staying awake. His warm hand pressed against my side, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was futile. The blood was still flowing, staining my clothes, the floor beneath me. I wanted to tell him that I didn't regret it, that I would do it again, but the words wouldn't come. The pain, the shock, everything was too much. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching, hurried and frantic. More voices. Someone was shouting orders, but I could barely process them. "Get her out of here." Ricardo's voice was a low growl. "Now." I felt hands lifting me, but my body was too heavy to respond. I was barely aware of the movement, only that the pain was still there, gnawing at me, tugging me further into the abyss of unconsciousness. "I've got her," someone said, a stranger's voice, far away but close at the same time. Ricardo's eyes met mine then, his gaze intense and calculating. He wasn't just concerned. There was something colder, something darker behind those amber eyes. His face was a mask of control, but there was something else lurking there, just beneath the surface. The realization hit me with a jolt. He was a man who didn't show weakness, not even in the face of danger. And yet, for a fleeting moment, when his gaze lingered on me, there was a flicker of something deeper, a glimmer of gratitude. The darkness pressed in again, and I let it take me. I don't remember much after that. The world was a blur of lights and shadows, of murmurs and distant beeping sounds. When I finally came to, I was no longer in the restaurant, no longer in the world I knew. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils as I slowly opened my eyes, wincing at the sharp pain in my side. The soft hum of machines and the low murmur of voices around me told me I wasn't in the hospital I was familiar with. This wasn't the emergency room where I had been rushed to countless times with bumps and bruises. This felt different. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind. "She's awake," a voice called from somewhere near my bedside. I turned my head, squinting against the light, and there he was, Ricardo, Ferry standing at the edge of the bed. His face was more relaxed now, but his sharp eyes still held that same intense gaze. He was dressed in a dark suit, The same suit he'd worn when he first walked into the restaurant. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "Don't try to move too much," Ricardo said, his voice softer now, but still carrying the same authority. "You're safe here." Safe? Was I? The words felt hollow in my mind. I barely understood how I'd gotten from the restaurant to here, or how much time had passed. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a weak cough escaped. My throat was dry, raw, and I could barely focus on what I was supposed to say. I had protected him, hadn't I? I had stepped in front of a bullet meant for him. Now, I had a bullet hole in my side, and nothing to show for it except a hospital bed and the lingering question of who he truly was. Ricardo's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, as if he understood my confusion. His fingers twitched, as though he wanted to reach out to me, but was stopping himself. "Rest," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You're safe, I told you." His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before he turned, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sterile room as he left, leaving me to grapple with the throbbing pain in my side and the knot of questions that had no answers. It wasn't until later that night, when I tried to sit up, that I finally realized the full weight of my situation. I had just protected a Mafia boss. Ricardo Ferry a man who had saved me from death only to place me in a world far darker than I could have imagined. The reality of what I had done settled on me like a blanket of dread. My life wasn't just changed. It was now tied to him, to his world, a world of shadows and danger I hadn't asked for, but one I couldn't escape. Ricardo Ferry was a name that meant power, fear, and respect. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was bound to him in a way that couldn't be undone. My head swam with the consequences, and though I couldn't deny the pull of the unknown, I also couldn't ignore the fear that rose in my chest at the thought of what was to come. Because the moment I stepped in front of that bullet for Ricardo Ferry, I had sealed my fate. I woke slowly, the fog in my mind lifting with each labored breath I took. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the dull ache in my side and the soft pulse of pain that radiated across my body. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with something else, something faintly foreign, like the scent of expensive cologne. The cool, crisp sheets beneath me felt luxurious in a way that immediately told me I wasn't in the hospital I was familiar with. This was not the ER I'd been rushed to after I collapsed. I blinked, the dim light above me blurring as my eyes adjusted. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery and the soft tapping of footsteps in the distance. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit me, and I lay back down, groaning softly. A moment later, I felt someone's presence beside me. I turned my head, and there he was, Ricardo Ferry standing at the edge of my bed. His appearance was the same as before. Powerful, composed, his tailored suit still pristine despite the chaos of what had happened. The only difference was his expression, no longer cold and detached, but almost concerned. "Don't move," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. He wasn't shouting orders now, the usual icy tone replaced with something almost gentle. But even then, I couldn't shake the unease that came with his words. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, sore from the shock. Instead, I cleared my throat, lifting my hand to touch the bandages wrapped around my side. The memory of the bullet lodged there hit me like a rush of ice water. "You're safe here," Ricardo said, his voice deep and steady. "My men took care of you. I made sure of it." I nodded, still struggling to process everything. His men? This wasn't a regular hospital room. The walls were decorated with fine artwork, and the room was far more luxurious than anything I had ever seen. Who was he? Ricardo Ferry wasn't just a wealthy businessman. No, this man wasn't a figure of society or just some suave customer with power and influence. He was something darker, something more dangerous. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my body felt too weak, too broken to do anything but lie there. Still, the question burned in my mind, the need to know overwhelming everything else. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice hoarse. "Why did you save me?" His eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind them, a trace of emotion, though I couldn't be sure. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully before speaking. "You saved my life," he said, his tone flat, but with an edge of something that sounded like acknowledgement. "And now I owe you. This is how things work in my world. You're not just some random person, Anita. You stepped in front of a bullet for me. You're connected to me now, in a way you can't undo." I wasn't sure if it was the pain or the weight of his words, but I felt like I was sinking deeper into the bed with every sentence. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I wasn't just a bystander caught up in something she didn't understand. I was part of his world now, a world I hadn't asked for, but had no choice but to accept. "I don't understand," I whispered, confusion clouding my thoughts. "Why me? Why protect me?" Ricardo's eyes softened for a moment, the walls he'd built around himself lowering just a fraction. "Because you saved me," he repeated, as if it were the simplest answer in the world. "And because you've become part of my family now." I recoiled slightly, the idea of being part of family like is setting off alarms in my head. Mafia, crime, power. These weren't things I'd ever thought about before. I had enough to worry about with my own family, with my brother's future. I hadn't asked for this. I had been caught in the crossfire, a victim of a world I knew nothing about. "You don't understand what you're involved in," Ricardo continued, his voice calm but tinged with something like warning. "When you protect someone like me, you become part of something much bigger than you. There's a price to be paid, Anita." I stared at him, heart pounding, trying to reconcile this man standing before me with the brutal truth of his words. I had saved his life, but in doing so, I had sealed my own fate. A fate bound to him, to his world, to a dangerous game that I didn't know the rules of. "But you still have a choice," he added, his voice steady once more. "I can make sure you're protected, safe from the chaos that's coming. But it'll come at a cost." The words hung in the air, and I could almost hear the weight of them. A choice. The idea felt like a lie. Was there really a choice when my actions had already led me here, into his world? A world where people didn't just get a second chance. "I don't want this," I said, the words coming out louder than I expected. "I didn't ask for any of this." Ricardo didn't flinch. Instead, he just stared at me, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to," he said. "But it's not about what you want anymore. It's about what's necessary." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, the reality settling in. There was no escaping this world now. I had already crossed the line by protecting him, and now I was bound to him whether I liked it or not. "You're part of the fairy family now, Anita," Ricardo said, his voice low but firm. "Whether you accept it or not, you owe me a debt, and I'll make sure you're kept safe if you agree to stand by me." My head spun. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself. I had always wanted more than waiting tables, more than the endless cycle of exhaustion. But this was something I had never anticipated. "Will you stay?" Ricardo's voice was steady, unwavering. "Will you join my family?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew, deep down, I didn't have a choice. The room felt colder now, the silence hanging between us. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing on my chest. A dangerous bond had been formed, and I wasn't sure if it was one I could escape from. Ricardo Ferry stood there, watching me, his gaze unreadable but intense. I could feel the weight of his scrutiny like a physical presence, suffocating and unyielding. The life I had known, the normal, mundane existence of a waitress, worrying about tips and bills, felt like a distant memory now. Everything had changed, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for what that meant. Ricardo moved then, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble floor. He turned away from me, his back rigid. There was something so commanding about him, even in his silence, that it made me feel small, fragile, and helpless. As he spoke again, his voice was colder, more distant. "You're mine now," he said flatly, without looking back at me, "whether you like it or not." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I didn't owe him anything, that I hadn't asked for any of this. But the truth was, I had already made my choice when I stepped in front of that bullet. I had already sealed my fate. My days blurred into one another after that. Ricardo's men kept a constant watch over me, their eyes always on me, their presence a reminder that I was no longer an ordinary woman, free to make her own choices. I was bound to him now, to his world, to his Mafia family. The fairy family was not something I had ever truly understood. I had always known of Mafia families, the rumors, the whispered warnings, the unspoken rules. But I had never been a part of that world. Not until now. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling their eyes on me. There were always men nearby, quietly observing, making sure I wasn't a threat to their boss. Even in the privacy of Ricardo's mansion, I could sense their presence, silent shadows moving just out of sight. Every word I spoke, every step I took felt like it was being cataloged, monitored, and scrutinized. It wasn't long before I realized the full extent of Ricardo's world. It wasn't just about wealth, power, or status. It was a world filled with danger, betrayal, and violence. His enemies were everywhere, and I had become part of that game, whether I wanted to or not. And I wasn't just collateral damage in this war. I was a target. It started small at first. Whispers and vague threats that Ricardo dismissed with a cold smile and a dismissive wave of his hand. He would tell me that everything was fine, that I had nothing to fear, but I could see the way his eyes never fully left me, as if watching for any sign of weakness or danger. Then came a night when everything changed. It was just after dark when the first shot was fired. I was sitting alone in the garden, lost in my thoughts, when the air around me suddenly shifted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I instinctively ducked. I hadn't heard the footsteps. I hadn't seen the men approach. Before I could react, a loud crack echoed in the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of a bullet ricocheting off the stone near me. I flinched, feeling the heat of the bullet pass just inches from my ear. Another shot rang out, this one hitting the flower pot beside me, shattering the ceramic into pieces. My heart was racing. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I didn't even think. Ricardo's voice, harsh and commanding, suddenly cut through the night air. Get down. In an instant, his men were moving, the yard flooded with shadows. They were fast, precise, and ruthless, their weapons trained on the assailants in a blur of movement. I froze, my mind scrambling to process what was happening. Who were these people? Why were they coming after me? Ricardo was there in a flash, grabbing my arm and yanking me to the ground just as another bullet tore through the air. His grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he was afraid I might slip away. I couldn't tell if he was trying to protect me or control me. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it had begun, replaced by the heavy sound of boots on gravel. They've already been dealt with, Ricardo said in a clipped tone, his face stone cold as he helped me to my feet. But his hands trembled slightly, betraying his calm exterior. His eyes never left me. You were lucky. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to regain my bearings. The adrenaline that had surged through me was now replaced by a deep, gnawing fear. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was personal. I wanted to ask who these people were, why they were after me, but the words wouldn't come. Ricardo seemed to sense my question before I even spoke. They were sent by someone who doesn't appreciate my business, he explained coldly, his eyes scanning the perimeter. You're connected to me now. You're a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. I felt a chill settle over me, deep in my bones. The danger was far more real than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just a pawn in Ricardo's world. I was his pawn, and the game was far from over. Ricardo's gaze locked onto mine. You're not safe, Anita. Not anymore. I couldn't escape this. I couldn't pretend I was still the same person I had been before I stepped in front of that bullet. My life had been rewritten, bound to Ricardo Ferry and the violent world he controlled. His voice dropped lower, a warning laced with something dangerous. And don't think for a second that anyone who sees you as a weakness will hesitate to use you against me. The reality hit me all at once. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a target. And worse, I was at the mercy of a man whose world was built on fear, loyalty, and violence. Each day since the shooting felt like I was sinking deeper into a world I had no place in. My injuries were healing, but the scars, physical and emotional, were just beginning to form. Ricardo had made sure I was taken care of, But the luxury of the room, the fine food, the comfortable bed, couldn't hide the truth that I was now bound to him, to his world, in ways I couldn't undo. The days had blurred together. He was always there, his presence lingering in the background like a shadow, watching over me. At first, I thought it was for my protection, but soon I realized it was more than that. It was control. Every move I made was under his watchful eye. Every decision, every breath, it all seemed to tie me closer to him. I was no longer just a waitress. I had become something else, something I couldn't quite define. A pawn? A piece in his game of power and loyalty? Or was I something more to him? There were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, where I saw the cracks in Ricardo's facade. The cold, calculated Mafia boss was still there, lurking behind a mask, but sometimes when he thought no one was looking, there was a tenderness in his eyes, a flicker of something softer, more human. But those moments were rare. Every day, I was reminded of the stakes of the cost of my actions. Ricardo wasn't a man who did things for free, not even a simple act of gratitude. I had protected him, and now I was bound by that act in ways I hadn't fully understood. It wasn't long before I realized my role in his operation wasn't just a passive one. I had become a part of his business. A very small part, sure, but a part nonetheless. It was as if I had stepped into a whirlpool where everything around me spun with a force I couldn't escape. I learned more about Ricardo's ruthless ways every day. He had a cold, calculating mind, capable of dismantling his enemies with a precision that left no room for weakness. The Ferry family wasn't just a mafia. It was an empire built on loyalty, blood, and fear. And in that empire, I was now something more than just collateral damage. I was connected to him. One afternoon, as I sat at the table in the sprawling mansion, Ricardo's trusted lieutenants came to visit. They spoke in hushed voices, and I overheard snippets of their conversation. Business, deals, threats. But what caught my attention was the tension in the room when they spoke of a problem that needed solving. A business deal had gone wrong, and one of Ricardo's men had made a costly mistake. An example needs to be made, Ricardo said coldly, his eyes never leaving the man sitting at the table. The man's fate seemed sealed with just a glance, his life in the balance of Ricardo's unspoken orders. But it wasn't just the orders that struck me. It was the calmness with which he gave them, the ease of his control over life and death. Ricardo wasn't just the boss. He was the absolute ruler, a man who wielded power over everything and everyone in his life, even the ones who were supposed to be loyal to him. Later that night, Ricardo came to me with a request. His eyes, cold and calculating as ever, studied my every reaction as he spoke. "There's a situation that needs handling," he said. "Someone needs to take care of it, and I'm asking you to do it." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes never wavered. "One of my men made a mistake. A costly one. He needs to disappear. It's a simple job. Just make sure it's done right." A sickening feeling settled in my stomach. "You want me to?" I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ricardo nodded. "You protected me once, Anita. You owe me. This is part of that debt." The words hit me like a slap. I hadn't expected this. I had thought I'd be left in the background, a part of the family by association, but never expected to act. But this was different. This was the reality of being part of his world, the Mafia world. "Please, Ricardo," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't do this. I didn't sign up for this." He leaned in, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You don't have a choice anymore. Not when you're tied to me like this." I sat back, my mind racing. The walls were closing in around me. The more I stayed with him, the more I became part of his operations, part of the web of violence and power that had entangled me. For the first time, I realized how deep I was in, how far Ricardo's grip had stretched, even into the deepest parts of my soul. I wasn't just tied to him by a debt anymore. I was tied to him by the very fabric of his empire. I couldn't escape, not without risking everything. Ricardo stood, his back straight, commanding as always. "You have a choice, Anita. Either you join the family fully and accept your place, or you leave and risk everything." His words echoed in my mind. There was no middle ground, no way to remain uninvolved. This was the choice he had given me, join his world or leave it. But leaving would mean cutting ties with everything I had known, and perhaps even with my own survival. I didn't have much time to think. Ricardo's presence was suffocating, demanding my loyalty, my obedience, my everything. Think it over, Ricardo said before turning to leave. But remember, once you make your decision, there's no going back. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind torn between the two paths laid out before me. The weight of his words pressed on me like a heavy stone. I had to make a decision, one that would define my life from this moment on. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Ricardo had already left the room, his words still echoing in my mind. I was no longer just an observer in his world. I was part of it now, whether I liked it or not. I had saved him. Now I belonged to him. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready for what that meant. The Mafia world he was part of, his family, his empire, was nothing like the life I had known. It wasn't about respect or loyalty in the way I understood them. In his world, betrayal was currency, and power was everything. Later that night, I found myself sitting in one of the plush leather chairs in Ricardo's office, waiting for him to return. The mansion felt cold, distant, despite the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. I had no idea what to expect when he walked back through that door. Would he demand my obedience, as he had before? Or would he finally break through the walls he'd built around himself? The sound of the door opening broke the silence. I looked up, and there he was, Ricardo, fairy standing in the doorway, his presence as imposing as ever. He wasn't in a suit this time. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened, and his sharp eyes seemed even colder without the usual mask of business. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life hiding his true self behind a facade, a man who had built his world on blood and fear. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he closed the door quietly behind him and walked toward me. His footsteps were soft, but they carried the weight of authority, of a man who controlled everything around him. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, waiting for him to speak first. Finally, he stopped in front of me, his gaze intense, measuring. "You've been asking questions," he said, his voice low, almost tired. "I can see it in your eyes. You want to know who I really am, why I do the things I do." I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. It had been gnawing at me for days, the feeling that there was more to Ricardo than what I had been shown. Beneath the cold exterior, the Mafia boss who commanded loyalty and fear, I felt there was something else, something human. "I'll tell you," he said, as though reading my mind. "But know this, Anita, what you learn tonight will change how you see me. Forever." I leaned forward, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. I couldn't deny the pull of curiosity, the need to understand the man I had become so entangled with. "I'm listening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ricardo's expression shifted for the briefest moment, as though he were deciding how much of himself he was willing to reveal. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke. "Years ago, my family was betrayed by someone close to us. It tore everything apart. My father, my brothers, we were all swept into a war we didn't want, all because of one man's greed and ambition. I was forced to take control when I was barely more than a boy. I had to grow up fast, learn to survive, learn that trust is a luxury that doesn't exist in my world." His eyes hardened, the raw pain of his past flickering in them for a moment before it was buried again beneath layers of cold detachment. "I don't show weakness, Anita. Not to anyone," he continued, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years of unspoken pain. "I protect what's mine at all costs. And now you're part of that." I couldn't look away. The man standing before me was not the untouchable figure I had imagined. He was someone broken by his past, forged into the hard, ruthless man who had claimed my life as part of his own. But there was a vulnerability in his voice, a flicker of regret I couldn't ignore. "I didn't choose this life, Anita," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But now it's who I am, and I won't apologize for it. Not to anyone. I wanted to say something, to tell him I understood, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say to a man who had built his empire on betrayal, who had given up everything, including his humanity, for power? Instead, I just nodded, the silence between us heavy with the weight of his confession. I understood now, in a way I hadn't before. Ricardo Ferri was not just the Mafia boss. He was a man who had been forged by the very world he had created, a world where loyalty was demanded and betrayal was punished without mercy. But there was more to his story. I could sense it, more that he wasn't telling me. He straightened up, his eyes narrowing as if he had made a decision. I've protected you, Anita. You're part of my world now, and you'll stay here with me or you'll leave. But know this, leaving means betraying me, and betrayal comes with consequences. I could feel the weight of his words settling over me. The decision wasn't mine to make anymore. I was already part of his world, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was whether I would stay and fight for a place in it, or leave, knowing it could cost me everything. Ricardo was asking for my loyalty, a loyalty that went far beyond what I had ever known. And if I said yes, there would be no turning back. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you need me to do? I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. Ricardo's eyes gleamed. There's a task that needs to be done, something that could change everything for both of us. And I need your help. My stomach churned at the thought of what Ricardo was about to ask of me, a task that could change everything. The weight of that responsibility, the danger of it, settled deep in my bones. Was this my chance to prove myself, to truly belong in his world? Or is it a step deeper into the abyss? I waited for Ricardo's answer, my body tense, as if bracing for impact. His eyes, always so calculating, softened for a moment, but the coldness remained beneath the surface, as if he were testing me. I wanted to look away, to ignore the pull he had on me, but I couldn't. Do you trust me, Anita? Ricardo's voice broke the silence, low and steady. I swallowed hard. How can I trust you when everything about you is built on lies? His gaze darkened, a flicker of something dangerous flashing across his face before he masked it again. You don't have to trust me. Not yet. But you will. Everyone who stays with me does. I opened my mouth to argue, but he raised a hand to stop me. The choice is yours, but I'm not giving you another option. If you leave, you'll be leaving everything behind. The Ferri family doesn't forget, and neither do I. His words felt like shackles, the weight of them pulling me deeper into a world I didn't belong in. But his presence, his control, his strength kept me here. I couldn't deny the tension, the way my body responded to his every move, even when I wanted to push him away. The silence stretched between us, thick with the unspoken understanding of what would come next. My pulse quickened as I realized just how much of a player I had become in this dangerous game. But as the words settled, I knew there was no going back. I nodded, more to myself than to him. What's the task? Ricardo's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of his complete certainty. There's a man who's crossed me, a man who's been trying to tear this family apart from the inside. He needs to be dealt with, and I need you to do it. I didn't need to ask more. I understood what he was asking. Betrayal, death, loyalty in the purest and most dangerous form. The weight of it sat on my shoulders like a burden, one I wasn't sure I could carry, but I also knew that refusing wasn't an option. The Ferri family was not a place for weakness. Not for him. Not for me. The next few days felt like a blur. Ricardo kept me close, always present, as if testing my resolve. His eyes never left me, but there were moments, fleeting ones, when I saw a different side of him. The vulnerability hidden behind the hardness. When he thought no one was watching, I caught him staring out the window, his jaw clenched, as if he were wrestling with a ghost from his past. It was those moments that made me question everything. But the lines between business and personal were blurring. I could feel in the air, heavy and suffocating. And just when I thought I was starting to understand the rules of this world, everything shifted again. One evening, as the sun began to set, Ricardo invited me to accompany him to a meeting with one of his associates. The tension in the air was palpable as we entered a dimly lit room, filled with men whose faces I recognized only from their silent presence at Ricardo's side. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and the low hum of quiet conversations. But when Ricardo locked eyes with the man across the table, Fabio, an old associate whose loyalty had been questioned, everything changed. "You've betrayed me." Ricardo's voice was ice-cold, yet laced with something more dangerous. The room grew silent, the air thickening with the weight of his words. "And now you'll pay the price." Fabio shifted in his seat, the sweat beading on his forehead. He stood up, shaking his head. "Ricardo, I swear." Before he could finish, Ricardo moved with the speed of a predator. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Fabio by the throat, lifting him off the ground with ease, his cold fury washing over the room. "Do not lie to me," Ricardo hissed, his grip tightening. I froze, unable to look away. I had never seen this side of him before. The man who was not just a mafia boss, but a killer, a predator with no mercy. In that moment, I understood just how far Ricardo was willing to go to protect his empire. And I was in it now. "Please," Fabio gasped, his face turning red as Ricardo held him up. "I didn't." Ricardo slammed him back down into his seat. "I don't want excuses. I want loyalty. And loyalty can only be earned by action." I watched as Ricardo's men moved to silence Fabio, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. This was the world I had entered. A world where betrayal was met with swift and brutal retribution. Ricardo's empire wasn't built on fear alone. It was built on the understanding that loyalty was everything, and if you broke it, you paid the price. Ricardo stood, wiping his hands as if the interaction had been nothing more than an inconvenience. "See to it that this is handled, and don't let it happen again." As we left the meeting, Ricardo's silence was more unsettling than any words he could have spoken. I walked beside him, my mind reeling. The man I had protected, the man who had become my world, was not just a mafia boss. He was a man with power so deep, so entrenched, that there was no escaping it. And the more I was pulled into his orbit, the more I realized just how dangerous that power was. In the quiet of his office later that night, Ricardo turned to me, his gaze piercing through the silence. "You did well today," he said, his voice low. There was a flicker of approval in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to mask the coldness beneath it. "But you're still learning." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. The task had changed something in me. I had crossed a line I never thought I'd approach. But the decision had already been made for me. There was no going back. Ricardo's eyes softened for a brief moment as he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're mine now, Anita, and no one will ever be allowed to take you from me." My pulse quickened, and I realized that, in his world, loyalty was the only currency that mattered, and betrayal was a price no one could afford. The days since that meeting had been nothing but a blur. Ricardo's empire was under threat from all sides, and the weight of it was suffocating. His enemies, both old and new, were closing in, and I could feel the tension in the air like a storm on the horizon. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now in the midst of a war, one that was threatening to tear everything apart. And I was right in the middle of it all. Ricardo had always been a man who controlled everything. But now, as the stakes grew higher, even he couldn't control the chaos that was unfolding. The line between business and personal had blurred beyond recognition. I had already crossed that line, and the consequences were starting to take shape. The betrayal came like a whisper in the night, subtle and silent, but sharp enough to tear through the trust Ricardo had built around him. One of his closest associates had been feeding information to his enemies. It was a blow that hit harder than any physical assault. The man Ricardo had once called a brother had turned against him, and now the betrayal was threatening to destroy everything. I had been with Ricardo for weeks now, enough to understand the intricacies of his world. But even with that understanding, I wasn't prepared for the cold, brutal confrontation that was about to take place. Ricardo didn't say much in the days leading up to the showdown. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something colder, more dangerous. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of the decisions he was about to make pressing down on us both. I had become a part of his life in ways I couldn't escape, but now I realized I had a choice to make. I could stand by him, or I could walk away. But walking away wasn't an option. Not now. Not with everything at stake. That night, the storm finally broke. We stood in the dimly lit conference room, the tension thick in the air. Ricardo was at the center of it all, his eyes steely and unblinking as he addressed his betrayer. The man who had once been a trusted ally was now kneeling before Ricardo, the fear in his eyes evident despite the defiant posture he tried to maintain. "You betrayed me." Ricardo's voice was low, controlled, yet there was something terrifying beneath it. "You turned against your own family for a few coins, and now you want mercy." The man's eyes flickered toward me, then back to Ricardo, his voice trembling. I had no choice. They threatened my family. Ricardo didn't flinch. "Everyone has a choice. You made yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it could choke me. Ricardo's betrayal was no longer just a word. It was a reality. And now he had to decide what to do with it. I stood there, helpless, as the situation unfolded. Loyalty had always been everything in this world. And yet, in that moment, I realized how fragile it was. How quickly it could be broken. How easily it could be shattered by a single act of treachery. Ricardo didn't hesitate. His decision was swift, and the sound of a gunshot echoed in the room. His former associate crumpled to the ground, the lifeless body falling with a sickening thud. Ricardo didn't even flinch. He didn't show the slightest trace of emotion as he turned away from the body and locked eyes with me. And then everything changed. "You see," Ricardo's voice was soft now, almost apologetic. "This is the world I live in. There is no room for weakness. There is no room for betrayal." I felt a chill run through me as his words sank in. This wasn't the world I had known. This was a world where survival came at the expense of everything else. I was trapped in it now. The weight of his gaze on me made my stomach turn. I had been a part of the betrayal. No, I had been a part of his world for better or for worse. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, Ricardo spoke again. "I'm giving you a choice, Anita," he said, his tone shifting. "The same choice I gave you before. Stay with me, stay by my side, and help me fix what's broken. Or leave. But know this, leaving isn't just walking away from me. You'll be leaving everything. Your life, your family, everything will be forfeit." I felt the air grow heavy around me. The decision loomed large. The room seemed to close in as I looked at Ricardo, his eyes searching mine for an answer. I knew what he was asking. He wanted me to choose a side, once and for all. The weight of the decision was crushing, and the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend this wasn't my life now. I looked at him, my heart racing, my mind spinning with the gravity of everything he had just said. I had no illusions anymore. This was no longer about protecting him. It was about survival. My survival. I stay. My voice was steady, but inside, I was screaming. I had chosen, and I knew that decision would tie me to him forever. Ricardo's face softened for just a moment, his cold exterior cracking ever so slightly. But then he turned away. "Good," he said, his voice steady again. "Because now you belong to me." Ricardo's words settled heavily in the air, leaving me to grapple with the weight of my decision. As I stood there, knowing there was no going back, I couldn't shake the feeling that my loyalty to him had sealed my fate and his. I had crossed a line, one that I knew I could never uncross. The path I had chosen was now a part of me, irrevocable and undeniable. Ricardo wasn't just a mafia boss. He was something more. And in choosing him, I had chosen his world, his life, and everything that came with it. It wasn't just the danger or the violence. It wasn't just the power struggles or the bloodshed. It was something deeper, something that had begun to tether me to him in a way I couldn't fully understand. Days passed in a haze of uncertainty. The violence that had erupted in the wake of Ricardo's betrayal had left a mark on both of us. I saw it in his eyes, in the way he moved, as if he were constantly calculating his next move. The world he lived in was shifting beneath him, and I was swept up in it, whether I liked it or not. His empire, though strong, was shaken. The people who had once been loyal to him now questioned his ability to lead. His enemies had grown bolder, and the cracks in his carefully constructed world had become more visible. I had witnessed it firsthand, the price of power, the constant battles for control, the betrayals that came from within. But through it all, Ricardo had kept me by his side, his grip on me tightening with every passing day. I was no longer a mere pawn in his game. I was an integral part of his life, of his plans. And though my role had shifted from mere observer to active participant, there was still a part of me that fought against it. The woman I had been before, the woman who was just trying to make ends meet, had vanished. In her place stood someone different, someone tied to Ricardo's world, bound by loyalty and debt. I didn't know what to make of it. What had I become? One evening, after another day of tension and uncertainty, I found myself alone with Ricardo. We were in his private study, the dim light from the fireplace casting shadows across the room. It had been weeks since the confrontation with his betrayer, and the silence between us had grown thick with unspoken words. I could feel him there, watching me, waiting for something I wasn't sure I was ready to give. But then he spoke, his voice low, almost tentative. "You've changed," Ricardo said, his gaze intense. "I've seen it in you, from the moment I brought you into my world. You're no longer the woman who was just trying to survive." I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? I had changed, but I wasn't sure I could explain how or why. Ricardo stood up and walked toward me, his movements slow, deliberate. "I didn't ask for any of this either," he continued, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps? Or was it something else? "I built this empire, but it came with a price. And now, you're a part of that price." The words were sharp, but there was an honesty in them that I hadn't expected. For the first time, Ricardo wasn't just the Mafia boss. He was a man who had lived through battles, both external and internal, and had emerged scarred but not broken. "You're still here," he said, his gaze softening as he stepped closer. "You're here because you want to be. Not because you owe me, not because you're afraid, but because you've made a choice." I met his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. The truth of what he was saying hit me hard. I had made a choice. I had chosen to stand by him. But that didn't make it any easier. The weight of it all, the violence, the danger, the consequences was crushing. "I never wanted this," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to be part of this world. But I'm here, and I don't know how to leave." Ricardo's expression softened further. For a brief moment, he looked almost vulnerable, as if the walls he had so carefully built around himself were beginning to crumble. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice steady. "Not now. Not ever." His words, though firm, held an undertone of something I couldn't quite place, something that made my heart race. His hand reached out, touching mine gently, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "Anita, you're more than just someone I saved. You're more than just a piece in my world," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're part of me now, and that means something." The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. Was it possible? Could it be that Ricardo was starting to feel something for me? Something more than just gratitude or obligation? Or was it just the pull of power, the bond of loyalty that had been forged between us in blood? I wanted to ask, to confront him with the questions swirling in my mind, but I couldn't. The moment felt too fragile, too raw to break with words. Instead, I just nodded, knowing that whatever path I chose now would forever change the course of my life. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Ricardo pulled me closer, his presence overwhelming. We stood there, wrapped in silence, the weight of everything that had come before pressing down on us. There was no going back. I had chosen to stay, to be with him. And in doing so, I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The world outside was still dangerous, the stakes higher than ever. But as I stood there with Ricardo, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just a pawn. I was part of his empire. And the future, our future, was uncertain. But it was ours to face together. As Ricardo's hand brushed against mine, his grip tightened, his voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. No matter what happens next, Anita, you and I are bound. There's no turning back now. And for the first time, I didn't want to.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.